Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. The television droned on in the background, a sports announcer's voice a painful reminder of the career he'd lost. Jonah took a long swig of his beer, his mind drifting to the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. How had it come to this? Just a few months ago, he'd been living the dream as a successful sports writer. Now, he was struggling to make ends meet. His phone buzzed, interrupting his pity party. It was Adam, his best friend and former colleague.
"Hey man, you up for grabbing a drink?"
Jonah sighed, weighing the invitation against his dwindling bank account.
"Sorry, bro. Tight on cash these days."
"My treat. I've got some news you might want to hear." Curiosity piqued, Jonah agreed to meet Adam at their usual haunt. He arrived at the dimly lit bar, spotting his friend nursing a whiskey at a corner table.
"So, what's this big news?"
Jonah slid into the booth, eyeing Adam suspiciously. Adam leaned forward, lowering his voice.
"I might have a way for you to get back into writing."
Jonah's heart quickened.
"Seriously? What's the catch?"
"Well," Adam hesitated. "It's not exactly sports writing, and you'd have to use a pen name." "Okay, I'm listening." Adam took a deep breath.
"The paper's looking for a new advice columnist, someone to write from a female perspective."
Jonah's brow furrowed.
"And how exactly am I supposed to do that?"
"By posing as a woman." Adam held up his hands as Jonah started to protest.
"Hear me out. You create this persona.
Let's call her Natalia. You write as her, giving advice on relationships, work, family, all from a woman's point of view." Jonah scoffed. "You've got to be kidding me. I don't know the first thing about being a woman, but you're a great writer, and you're empathetic. Plus, you've got a daughter. Use that insight." Adam leaned back, crossing his arms. "Look, I know it's not ideal, but it's a foot in the door, and it pays well." Jonah ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. The idea was absurd, but the promise of a steady paycheck was tempting. "I don't know, man. It feels wrong. Just think about it, okay? The offer's on the table if you want it." As Jonah left the bar, his head swam with conflicting thoughts. Could he really pull this off? And more importantly, should he? The next morning, Jonah found himself staring at his laptop, a blank document mocking him. He'd tossed and turned all night, weighing the pros and cons of Adam's proposal. In the harsh light of day, with his bank account overdrawn and another bill in the mail, the decision seemed clearer. He began to type, creating the backstory for Natalia. She was 35, divorced, with a teenage daughter, a career woman who'd struggled to balance work and family. As the words flowed, Jonah surprised himself with how easily he slipped into Natalia's voice. Over the next few weeks, Jonah, or rather Natalia, became the paper's new rising star. Readers connected with her honest, heartfelt advice. Letters poured in, seeking guidance on everything from workplace discrimination to dating after divorce. But as Natalia's popularity grew, so did Jonah's discomfort. He found himself spending hours researching women's issues, trying to understand perspectives he'd never considered before. The more he wrote, the more he realized how little he knew about the challenges women faced daily. One afternoon, as Jonah sat at his desk, buried in research for his latest column, his phone rang. It was his ex-wife, her voice tight with concern. "Jonah, it's Blair. She's having a really tough time at school. Can you talk to her?" His heart sank. In the whirlwind of his new secret career, he'd neglected his most important role, being a father. "Of course. Put her on." Blair's voice crackled through the phone, small and uncertain. "Dad? Hey, sweetheart. What's going on?" As Blair poured out her troubles, bullies at school, the stress of her parents' divorce, feeling lost and alone, Jonah felt a pang of guilt. He'd been so wrapped up in Natalia's world that he'd forgotten about the real women in his life who needed him. "I wish I could talk to Mom about this stuff," Blair sighed. "But she's always so busy and I don't want to bother her." An idea struck Jonah. "You know, there's this advice column in the paper. The writer, Natalia, she gives great advice. Maybe you could write to her?" Blair perked up. "Really? You think she could help?" "I think it's worth a shot, and hey, I'm always here for you too, okay?" After hanging up, Jonah stared at his computer screen, a new perspective dawning. He wasn't just writing as Natalia anymore. He was becoming her in a way. And maybe, just maybe, that could make him a better father too. The next day, Jonah arrived at the newspaper office, his heart pounding. He'd never actually come in person before, always submitting his columns remotely. But today was different. Today, Natalia needed to make an appearance. He tugged at the hem of his floral blouse, adjusting the padded bra underneath. The wig itched and the heels pinched his feet. But as he stepped into the bustling newsroom, he straightened his shoulders and tried to channel Natalia's confidence. Adam's eyes widened as he spotted Jonah, or rather Natalia, weaving through the desks. He hurried over, grabbing Jonah's elbow and steering him towards a quiet corner.
"What the hell are you doing here?"
Adam hissed. Jonah smoothed his skirt, trying to ignore the stares from curious coworkers.
"I need to be seen. People are starting to ask questions about why Natalia never comes to the office."
Adam ran a hand through his hair, exasperated.
"And you thought showing up in drag was the solution."
"It's not drag," Jonah protested.
"It's method writing."
Before Adam could respond, a booming voice cut through the office chatter.
"Natalia, there you are."
They turned to see the editor-in-chief, a rotund man with a bushy mustache, approaching with open arms.
"So good to finally meet you in person. Your column is a hit."
Jonah pitched his voice higher, offering a nervous smile.
"Thank you, sir. I'm thrilled to be here."
As the editor chatted animatedly about future plans for the column, Jonah caught sight of his reflection in a nearby window. The person staring back was a stranger, a middle-aged woman with carefully applied makeup and a tentative smile. For a moment, he felt a disconnect, as if he were watching someone else entirely. The day passed in a blur of introductions and small talk. Jonah found himself hyper-aware of every movement, every word. He noticed how the male staffer's eyes lingered a beat too long, how the women seemed to instantly include him in their circles. It was eye-opening and uncomfortable in equal measure. By the time he made it home, Jonah's feet were aching and his head was spinning. He kicked off the heels with a groan of relief, collapsing onto his couch. As he began to remove his makeup, his phone buzzed with a text from Adam. "You okay? That was something." Jonah stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Was he okay? The experience had been surreal, to say the least. But more than that, it had been enlightening. He'd always considered himself a progressive guy, but today had shown him how much he still had to learn. "I'm fine," he texted back. "Just processing." Over the next few weeks, Jonah found himself slipping more and more into Natalia's skin. He started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way women held their keys between their fingers when walking alone at night. The subtle ways they deflected unwanted attention. His writing began to change, too. Natalia's advice became more nuanced, more empathetic. Readers responded enthusiastically, praising her insight and compassion. Jonah felt a mix of pride and guilt at the accolades, pride in his growing understanding, guilt at the deception. One evening, as Jonah sat at his desk poring over letters from readers, his doorbell rang. He opened it to find Blair standing there, her eyes red-rimmed and her backpack clutched to her chest. "Dad, can I stay here tonight? Mom and I had a fight." Jonah's heart clenched. He ushered her inside, wrapping her in a hug. "Of course, sweetheart. What happened?" As Blair recounted the argument, something about curfews and independence, Jonah found himself listening with new ears. He heard the frustration in her voice, the need to be understood and respected. "You know," he said carefully, "I read something interesting in Natalia's column the other day, about how sometimes when teenagers push boundaries, they're not trying to be rebellious. They're just trying to figure out who they are." Blair looked up, intrigued. "Really?"
Jonah nodded, settling onto the couch beside her. Maybe you could show your mom the column. It might help her understand where you're coming from.
As they talked late into the night, Jonah realized something profound. His experience as Natalia wasn't just changing how he saw the world, it was changing how he parented. He was listening more, judging less, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was really connecting with his daughter. The next morning, Jonah woke to find Blair already up, hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table. Her brow was furrowed in concentration as she typed furiously.
"What are you up to, kiddo?"
Jonah asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Blair looked up, a mix of excitement and nervousness on her face.
"I'm writing to Natalia about Mom and me. Do you think she'll answer?"
Jonah's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't anticipated this complication. "I'm sure she will, sweetheart. Natalia seems to really care about her readers." As Blair returned to her letter, Jonah retreated to his bedroom, his mind racing. How could he respond to his own daughter's plea for help without giving himself away? The lines between Jonah and Natalia were becoming increasingly blurred. Later that day, Jonah sat at his desk, Blair's letter open before him. Her words tugged at his heart, the raw emotion, the confusion, the longing for understanding. He began to type, channeling all of his newfound empathy and insight into Natalia's response. "Dear Blair, your letter touched me deeply. The relationship between mothers and daughters can be so complex, filled with love but also misunderstandings. It's clear that both you and your mom are trying your best, but sometimes our best intentions get lost in translation. Have you considered sitting down with your mom when you're both calm and explaining how you feel? Not just about the curfew, but about your need for independence and trust. Remember, your mom's rules come from a place of love and concern. Try to understand her perspective, even as you ask her to understand yours. As for your parents' divorce, it's natural to feel caught in the middle. But remember, their relationship issues are not your burden to bear. It's okay to love them both without taking sides. Lastly, never forget your own strength. You're navigating a challenging time with grace and maturity. Be proud of yourself for reaching out and seeking help. That takes courage. Wishing you all the best, Natalia." As Jonah hit send, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride in the advice he'd given, guilt at the deception, and a deep, aching love for his daughter. He hoped that somehow, through Natalia's words, he could provide the guidance and support Blair needed. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Natalia's column continued to gain popularity, with readers praising her insightful and compassionate advice. Jonah found himself diving deeper into research, attending women's groups, as Natalia, of course, and even volunteering at a local women's shelter. Each experience peeled back another layer of understanding. He began to see the world through new eyes, the constant vigilance required to navigate a world that often felt unsafe. But as Jonah's empathy grew, so did his internal conflict. The more he understood and respected women's experiences, the more uncomfortable he became with his deception. He was living a lie, and the weight of it was becoming unbearable. One evening, as Jonah sat at his desk struggling to write his latest column, Adam dropped by unannounced. He took one look at Jonah's haggard face and slumped shoulders and knew something was wrong. "All right, spill it," Adam said, settling into a chair across from Jonah. "What's eating you?" Jonah sighed, pushing away from his desk. "I can't do this anymore, Adam. It's tearing me apart. The column, but it's going so well." "That's just it," Jonah interrupted. "It's going too well. People trust Natalia. They pour their hearts out to her, and I'm a fraud." Adam leaned forward, his expression serious. "You're not a fraud, Jonah. You've put in the work. You've learned. You've grown. The advice you're giving is real and valuable." "But it's based on a lie," Jonah countered. "And what about Blair? She's been writing to Natalia. My own daughter is pouring her heart out to me, and she doesn't even know it's me." A heavy silence fell between them. Finally, Adam spoke.
So what are you going to do?
Jonah ran a hand through his hair, his decision crystallizing. I have to come clean, to everyone, the readers, the paper, and Blair. The next morning, Jonah sat in the editor's office, his heart pounding. He'd shed Natalia's disguise, coming as himself, just a man, terrified but determined.
I don't understand,
the editor sputtered, his face turning an alarming shade of red.
You're telling me that you, a man, have been writing our women's advice column?
Jonah nodded, his throat dry.
Yes, sir, and I take full responsibility for my deception. I'll resign immediately.
To Jonah's surprise, the editor's anger seemed to deflate. He slumped back in his chair, regarding Jonah with a mixture of disbelief and... was that admiration? You know, the editor said slowly.
This could be one hell of a story.
Jonah blinked, confused. Sir? Think about it. Man learns to understand women by becoming one. It's got Pulitzer written all over it. As the editor excitedly outlined his vision for a series of articles chronicling Jonah's journey, Jonah felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't out of the woods yet. There were still readers to address, apologies to make. But for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. The hardest conversation, however, was yet to come. That evening, Jonah invited Blair over for dinner. As they sat at the kitchen table, the words he'd rehearsed 100 times stuck in his throat. Dad? Blair asked, concern etching her features. Is everything okay? Jonah took a deep breath. Sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Natalia. As Jonah recounted the whole story, his unemployment, the deception, the lessons learned, Blair's expressions ranged from shock to disbelief to, finally, understanding. So all those times I wrote to Natalia, that was you? She asked, her voice small. Jonah nodded, his heart heavy. I'm so sorry, Blair. I never meant to deceive you. I wanted to help and I didn't know how. To his surprise, Blair reached across the table and took his hand. Dad, do you remember what you wrote to me about Mom? About trying to see things from her perspective? Jonah nodded, confused. Well, I did that, and it worked. Mom and I, we're doing better now. We're talking more, understanding each other. Blair squeezed his hand. That was you, Dad? You helped us? Tears pricked Jonah's eyes. I just wanted to be there for you, to understand what you were going through. Blair smiled, a glimmer of mischief in her eyes. Well, dressing up as a woman is certainly one way to do it. They both burst into laughter, the tension of the moment breaking. As their giggles subsided, Blair looked at her father with newfound respect. You know, Dad, what you did, it was weird and kind of messed up, but it was also brave. You tried to understand. That's more than a lot of people do. Jonah felt a warmth spread through his chest. I love you, kiddo. And I promise from now on, no more secrets. Just me, trying my best to be the dad you deserve. As they hugged, Jonah realized that while his journey as Natalia was ending, his journey as a more understanding, empathetic person and father was just beginning. He had a lot to learn, a lot to atone for. But with Blair by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, Jonah's story broke. As the editor had predicted, it caused a sensation. There was backlash, of course, accusations of deception, of appropriation. But there was also support, particularly from women who felt that Jonah's journey had opened important dialogues about gender, empathy, and understanding. Jonah wrote a series of articles chronicling his experiences, laying bare his initial ignorance, his growing awareness, and the profound changes he'd undergone. He spoke at conferences, participated in panel discussions, always emphasizing that his experience was just a glimpse into the complexities of womanhood. Through it all, Blair stood by him, proud of her father's growth and his courage in admitting his mistakes. Their relationship deepened, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. As for Natalia, she lived on, in a way, The newspaper decided to continue the column, but with a twist. Each week, a different woman would take the helm, sharing her unique perspective and advice. Jonah, now working as an editor, helped coordinate the column, using his experience to ensure a diverse range of voices were heard. One evening, as Jonah sat on his balcony watching the sunset, Blair joined him, 2 steaming mugs of tea in her hands. "Penny for your thoughts, Dad," she asked, handing him a mug. Jonah smiled, wrapping his hands around the warm ceramic.
"Just thinking about how much has changed. How much I've changed."
Blair nodded, settling into the chair beside him.
"You know, I'm proud of you, Dad. Not just for owning up to everything, but for really trying to understand, for listening." "I'm still learning," Jonah admitted. "Every day, but I'm trying."
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.